You hear the name Vladimir Putin, and for more than 2 decades, it's been synonymous with power in Russia. But his rise to the top was anything but guaranteed. We're going to dig into how he navigated that path, from some pretty humble beginnings all the way to the very summit of global politics.
I mean, really think about that question. How does anyone become one of the most powerful people on the planet? Is it just dumb luck? Is it brilliant strategy? Or is it about grabbing the right moments in history? Well, for Vladimir Putin, it was definitely a mix of all three, and it played out over a long, long time.
A climb. That's really the best way to picture his story. A long, slow, calculated 4-decade climb that started not in some fancy government building, but on the streets of a city still healing from war.
All right, so to really get this, we've got to go back to the beginning. We need to look at those early years that really forged the discipline and the worldview that would end up defining his entire career.
So he was born back in 1952 in Leningrad, what we now call St. Petersburg, to a regular working-class family. Growing up then meant being surrounded by scarcity, post-war discipline. He got into judo pretty early on, which might be a little clue about his strategic mind. He crushed it in law school, and in 1975, he achieved the stream he'd had since he was a kid. He got recruited by the KGB. The KGB, the Soviet Union's legendary intelligence agency. That job eventually took him to East Germany in the 80s, putting him right on the front lines of the Cold War.
Now, to understand Putin, you have to try and picture this moment. He's a Soviet intelligence officer in Dresden, East Germany, and the world he was trained to defend is literally crumbling right in front of his eyes. Seeing the Berlin Wall come down, seeing that perceived collapse and weakness firsthand, that experience would basically shape his entire life's mission to restore Russian strength and make sure the world knew it.
So when the Soviet Union finally collapsed, Putin came back to a Russia that was in total chaos. But for a guy with his training and his ambition, all that chaos wasn't a problem. No way. It was an opportunity. It was a ladder. And he started climbing. And man, did he climb that ladder fast. Just look at this. He starts out in '91 in St. Petersburg's city government. By '96, he's in Moscow, working directly in President Boris Yeltsin's administration. And then things really kick into high gear. '98, he's the head of the FSB. That's the agency that replaced the KGB. And just 1 year after that, he's prime minister. I mean, that is an incredibly fast rise. So what was his secret? How did he move up so quickly? Well, you have to remember, the 1990s in Russia was a wild time. Turbulent, often pretty corrupt. And then there's this guy, Putin, who just came across as something rare, competent. He was seen as a guy who got things done, who was intensely loyal, and who was a sharp strategic thinker. And those were exactly the qualities that earned him the trust of a very shaky inner circle, including President Yeltsin himself.
So he's made it to prime minister, the #2 spot in the entire country. But honestly, nobody, and I mean nobody, could have seen what was about to happen. This next moment is what changed absolutely everything.
Okay, picture this. It's New Year's Eve, 1999. The whole world is getting ready to pop the champagne for the new millennium, and on Russian TV, the country's president, Boris Yeltsin, gets on and drops an absolute political bombshell. He's resigning, effective immediately. And in that very same speech, he named his hand-picked successor. And just like that, Vladimir Putin, this quiet guy from the bureaucracy, was thrust into the spotlight as the acting president of the largest country on earth. And Putin did not hesitate, not for a second. He immediately moved to project this image of strength, of stability. His decisive, tough-as-nails stance on the Second Chechen War really connected with a public that was just plain tired of the chaos of the '90s. He seemed like the firm hand they'd been waiting for.
And it didn't take long. By March of 2000, it was a done deal. He won the presidential election, officially going from an appointed successor to a leader with his very own mandate from the people. The Putin era had truly begun. So he's reached the top of the mountain. Now what? What does he do with all that power? Well, his first 2 terms were all about one thing: completely reshaping Russia from the inside out. If you look at his first 8 years in power, one word really sums it up: control. He stabilized an economy that was still in shambles from a crisis. He systematically brought the powerful regional governors back under Moscow's authority. He made sure the state had control over the country's huge energy resources. And he started rebuilding Russia's military. Every single one of these moves was designed to forge a stronger, more unified state, with him right at the center.
But then, in 2008, he hits a wall. Constitutional term limits say he has to step down. So what does he do? He pulls off this masterful political maneuver. He steps aside, lets his hand-picked guy Dmitry Medvedev become president, and he just slides into the prime minister's job. But let's be real. While his official title changed, his actual influence didn't. He was still the de facto leader, the one calling the shots. And right on schedule, 4 years later, he returned to the presidency. This time, though, things were a little different. His return was met with these big street protests, which was a real sign that the political mood inside Russia was starting to shift. All right, so this brings us to the next chapter of his role, and this is where we see a major pivot. With his power pretty much consolidated at home, the focus shifts outward. Now it's all about reasserting Russia's role as a major player on the world stage. The years that followed were really defined by this new, much more assertive foreign policy. You had the annexation of Crimea in 2014, and then Russia's military intervention in Syria in 2015. These weren't random acts. They were loud and clear signals that Russia was back and was ready to act decisively to protect its interests. So what's the common thread that ties all this together? It's a consistent, deliberate strategy of pushing back against what he sees as Western influence and challenging that international order that was set up after the Cold War ended. So when you step back and you look at the whole arc of his life, from a working-class kid in Leningrad all the way to the Kremlin, a few things become crystal clear. You see immense personal ambition, you see cold, hard strategic calculation, and you see an incredible amount of political resilience through decades of absolute turmoil. And that kind of brings us to our final thought here. His climb from the shadows to the summit was without a doubt a masterclass in navigating chaos and seizing every opportunity. But looking at this 4-decade journey, it really makes you wonder, what does his story ultimately tell us about the nature of power itself? How it's won, how it's kept, and what it even means in our world today?